And welcome back, listeners. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of the Invisible Threat Podcast. And as is normal, I'm joined by my esteemed co-host, Dr. Matt and Joanne Eby, coming in from their new digs in the Vegas area. You guys are going to be back there now, moving away from the Midwest back to the West. How you guys doing today?
We drove out to Vegas this time, driving across the country. And yeah, if people have never done it, if you've never done a drive across the America, you need to do it. Like, the old Route 66, etc. It is such a beautiful, beautiful place. There are so many things to see. And, coming through like the Rocky Mountains between Denver and Grand Junction, it is just unbelievable. And then traveling across southern Utah, it is, just fantastic scenery. So if, for our listeners, if you get a chance to do that, it's long, but yeah. And then so many different places to stop and see along the way. What was that called, Joanne? Devil's Backbone?
That was on a separate highway. We didn't do that this time, but pictures can't do it justice. Like, you just have to be in a car and just, it's amazing.
I'm excited to have you guys be much closer in proximity, obviously, to our family and Epic Services Company and the whole thing. So glad to hear that things are moving in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. I like to timestamp these things. As you know, we are coming up on the Open Championship, right? Big golfer I am that everybody knows, right? So another major coming up, the Open Championship, and it's getting exciting. And what I love about that time horizon is, it really starts at like 1 o'clock in the morning, right? You can actually start watching the golf at like 1 o'clock in the morning. The Open Championship coming up here on this upcoming Thursday. Obviously, we're here on a Monday afternoon, and again, thank you, listeners, for joining us for another episode. And I'm really, really excited about what we're going to be talking about, because it's really going to be the foundation of where we're going in the next, 3, 4, 5 episodes. So in the last episode, let's talk about that. We asked a pretty simple question. If the fiduciary profession needs to be creating new knowledge, what should the profession actually do? Dr. Matt, I'm going to leave that up to you. Let's talk about that.
I think we should begin by answering one question, and to focus specifically on that, because it's, what do we really need to know? And that just may sound obvious, but it's one of the most important questions any profession can ask, because every profession eventually reaches a point where experience alone is no longer enough. Experience explains the past, and research prepares us for the future. And the bridge between those two is called a research agenda.
And Matt, when most people hear research agenda, they immediately think of universities, academic journals, or dissertations. But that's not what we are talking about here.
Yeah, I agree, Joanne. A research agenda isn't really an academic exercise. In this particular case, it's a professional decision. It answers a very practical question for us. What knowledge does the fiduciary profession need to intentionally create?
Yeah, so this isn't about finding research topics based on someone's opinion or area of interest, right? It's about deciding what knowledge the profession needs in the near future and, probably 10 or 20 years from now.
It's a fact that every profession has limited resources, limited time and money, limited researchers, limited attention and focus. So every profession must choose. Not every question deserves to be researched, but some questions are so important that the future of the profession, the success of the profession, the longevity of the profession depends on answering them.
And that's why a research agenda matters here. It is not simply a list. It's a statement of focus and priorities for the fiduciary industry.
Yeah. Like I was saying, Joanne, the research agenda says these are the questions worth investigating. These are the assumptions worth testing. These are the discoveries that could fundamentally improve professional practice.
So, if we were creating a research agenda for the fiduciary profession, where would be the best place to start?
Well, Carter, that's a great question, and you're always bring us to the focal point. I think there are 5 general areas of focus. For simplicity's sake, let's call them themes. First, the first theme, understanding fiduciary discretion. The second theme, defining significant fiduciary activities, or SFAs. The third theme, how to design better fiduciary organizations. The fourth, technology and fiduciary practice. And the fifth, developing the profession. Well, let's take them one at a time.
Matt, we start with the thing that really makes this fiduciary profession unique. We begin with fiduciary discretion itself, because until we understand how fiduciaries actually exercise discretion, everything else rests on assumptions. What is fiduciary discretion? That's a fundamental question. How does it form? Why do experts differ when it comes to fiduciary discretion? How does fiduciary discretion become distorted? And can discretion be observed? Can it be measured, monitored, and even improved? Every other research question will depend on answering this first one.
That's really excellent focus, Joanne. And if discretion is the engine of fiduciary practice, I think the second theme, as we discussed, is significant fiduciary activity. Significant fiduciary activity tells us where that engine is actually operating. Where does discretion occur? Can significant fiduciary activities be identified consistently? Can organizations inventory them? Can governance focus on them? Before we manage fiduciary risk, we have to know where fiduciary discretion actually exists.
That's right, Matt. And as our listeners will recall, organizations don't exercise discretion. People in the organizations are the ones who exercise discretion. But organizations actually are the institutions that shape how people exercise discretion. If we better understand fiduciary discretion, then we can begin asking a different kind of organizational question. Not simply how organizations should be managed, but organizations and design. The questions are for that theme, should they be designed to improve the exercise and potentially the flow of fiduciary discretion? For this theme, questions like how should committees in an organization be designed to improve fiduciary discretion? Maybe what governance structures produce the best fiduciary outcomes? Is it the usual, what we call tic tac and toe, trust investment committee, trust administration committee, trust operations committee? Is that the best? We've been doing it for years, but no one really knows if this produces the best fiduciary outcomes. How should first and second line oversight support and not interfere, but support the exercise of fiduciary discretion? Another question, which policies strengthen fiduciary discretion? Or looking at controls, which controls improve fiduciary outcomes and which simply improve documentation. Ask what organizational characteristics will distinguish exceptional fiduciary institutions from average ones. And here's a thought. Are trust departments organized around trust administrators because that's the way that traditional banks operated through tellers at the windows? Perhaps the next generation of fiduciary institutions should be designed around something else. Maybe it should be designed around discretion rather than trust administration. But without the knowledge development behind that, it's anyone's guess as to how or even if that is a feasible solution.
That's really insightful, Joanne. That's a tremendous question. And with respect to technology, the initial question isn't, how should the fiduciary industry use the technology, like artificial intelligence, for example, as the current example? The initial question is, what role should technology ever play in the exercise of fiduciary discretion? Only after we answer that question, after we research that question, should we begin discussing design and implementation. In research, we would answer questions like, which significant fiduciary activities should always require human discretion? Which activities can safely incorporate artificial intelligence? How does artificial intelligence influence the way fiduciaries interpret facts and exercise discretion? How should fiduciaries govern digital assets as an emerging fiduciary responsibility? How should automation change fiduciary practice without diminishing fiduciary duty? Technology should support fiduciary discretion, not redefine it. And these are questions that only research can answer.
And Matt, if we answer all of these questions, then moving on to the fifth theme, how do we actually make sure the fiduciary profession and the beneficiaries will actually benefit from that research? Because research only creates value when it becomes part of professional practice. Questions to be explored include questions like, how should fiduciaries be educated? Should they be educated differently than they are today? How should fiduciary competency be assessed? Should certification evolve to reflect evidence-based fiduciary practice? Can diagnostic tools measure how individuals and committees exercise fiduciary discretion? How should fiduciary flight instruments help practitioners improve over time? How can research findings be translated into everyday fiduciary practice? These things need to be researched in order to develop the profession and set it up for the future. Research will only change your profession when it becomes standard practice.
I'm sitting here listening to the two of you go back and forth, and I'm just so thankful that I get to be part of this, ongoing procedure that I believe is going to be so impactful and so necessary and so needed and has been for such a long time. And just being able to listen to you go, Matt, you'll share some insight, and then Joanne, you share your insight. And it's so exciting. So Matt, let me ask you this. What's the one thing listeners should, now I remember all these things on a regular basis, but as a layperson compared to the knowledge that you both have inside of those amazing, experiences that you've had along the way. But what's the one thing listeners should really remember today?
That's a great question and a focal point, Carter. I think if there's one thing, it's this, that every profession inherits knowledge, but the best professions create it. And the way they create it is by deciding what is worth knowing. And that's what a research agenda does. It identifies the questions that will shape the future of the profession.
And Carter, today's episode was not about answering those questions, not at all. It's really just about identifying questions that would potentially frame the research agenda for the fiduciary industry.
Carter, think of this episode as the roadmap. And then beginning with our next episode, however, we're going to start following the roadmap we identified here. I think we'll do it one theme at a time, one discovery at a time. Because if we're serious about creating fiduciary knowledge, and I think that we are, there's only one place to begin. Obviously, at the beginning, with the first theme.
Yeah. So basically, here's what we're saying, listeners. Next time on The Invisible Threat, we begin exploring the first research frontier, right? Understanding fiduciary discretion. Because before we can improve fiduciary practice, we have to understand how fiduciaries actually exercise discretion. So until then, thank you for joining us on The Invisible Threat. Most organizations move past these topics. We don't. Dr. Matt, Joanne, again, I could sit here and I could listen to, being a fly on the wall, if you will, right? That's what it kind of feels like a lot of times as I'm listening to you go back and forth, and the amount of just how the knowledge just flows. And I can't wait till we get to some real meat and potatoes, as they say, as we continue down this journey and sharing with our listeners, what they're going to be able to gain from those insights that the two of you have. So, as always, thank you guys so much for imparting your wisdom.
Yeah, Carter, everybody, all of us together, really a dynamic team. You bring so much to the table for us here, and extracting a lot of this, the insights, and focusing us on the topic. So, thanks so much for being a great host as always, and we couldn't do this all without you for sure.
I know that our listeners are getting a lot of information. They're getting a lot of very valuable, but what they're going to be receiving in the future, that's what I'm the most excited about. So for my esteemed co-host, Dr. Matt and Joanne Eby, we want to make sure that don't forget to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and share being the operative word there. Make sure you share, because this is literally going to be information that's not currently available. We're creating knowledge in real time here, basically. So again, make sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So again, for my esteemed co-host, I'm Carter Wilcoxson, CEO and founder of Epic Services Company, wishing you all a very wonderful day. And we will see you next time on the Invisible Threat Podcast. Thank you, everybody.